Right, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar organised by ASFP. The subject is Building Safety Act and the Golden Thread. A lot of this is a repeat and/or development on stuff that Niall and myself presented at the Aviva seminar in London last week. I'm going to be joined today by our new technical officer, member of the newest member of the ASFP team, Stuart Southall. So I'm going to do quite a lot of it, but Stuart's going to do the stuff on the golden thread, because that's going to be very important in his life over the next coming months. As ever, today we're doing the webinar on Zoom. So we have there's a question and answer facility. There's a question and answer box that you should be able to access. And if you could please we've got hopefully, if time allows, at the end we're going to do a Q&A session. So if you want us to ask something while we're going through, put it onto the Q&A box. There is a chat box that we'll keep an eye on as we go through. Those of you that have been to one of our webinars knows that we stick 2 or 3 polls in the middle of the thing, primarily to get feedback from yourselves as we go through on some of the issues. So we'll do all that. We'll go through the presentation, hopefully time for some Q&A at the end of it, and then we'll sum up and close. If you want to get in touch with us, please use either the chat or the Q&A function as we go through. And as a bit of a parish news before we start, this webinar has got CPD accreditation for an hour's worth of CPD. If you want a CPD certificate, there's an email address there, the info@ASFP, where you can ask for a certificate. I would point out to you that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the ASFP website and YouTube stuff thereafter. If you want the CPD certificate, you have to actually be here now as we're doing it live and not watching it on catch up. We can't do CPD certificates for people who watch it on catch up. We get feedback on the attendees list who've been here throughout the webinar, and we use that to verify CPD attendance. So if you want a CPD certificate and you're here now at just after noon on the 20th of September, then please info@ASFP. But if you're watching on catch up, sorry, we can't do it. And that takes us rapidly into our first poll question, which is going to appear on the screen in front of you now. He hopes, if all of this is working. So there you go. Poll question 1 is up on the screen, and it's what's your involvement in the passive fire protection sector? You may have seen me do this one. It just helps us to judge the audience as we go through, and so that we know who we're talking to and what the important stuff is. You may, if you're watching this on an iPhone, then some of the functionality, including this polls, doesn't always work. We occasionally get email sort of comments in the chat that I can't access the polls. That's if watching this on a phone. Why? Okay. And so there you go. So we've got a broad selection: 20% architect and designer, 22% manufacturer, but some specifiers, some distributors, 8% main contractors, 5% installers. Excellent. Okay, thanks very much for that. So it shows we've got a broad range of people here today. So what we're going to talk about. So we're talking about the Building Safety Act, and there has been some recent developments by ways of some secondary legislation. So we'll look at that. We're looking at the safety regulator. We're looking at the building safety regulator and what HSE are going to be doing. golden thread for we'll look at the gateways that are coming and what that means to people. Golden thread, CPR, and competence. Well, I finish off with the vexed question of competence. So, reminder for those of you here, Building Safety Act. Building Safety Act is the key piece of enabling legislation to implement all 53 of the recommendations that Dame Judith Hackett made in the Building a Safer Future report that was published in May 2018. Royal assent for the Building Safety Act, it achieved royal assent in April last year. The final text of it was published in May last year. And what that gave, it gave the Secretary of State powers to write new legislation, to make new secondary legislation. And that secondary legislation was has been filtering through a period of time. There was a slew of things that the government did secondary legislation to bring in as of April this year, so royal assent plus 12 months. And the next slew of secondary legislation is aimed at bringing provisions into place as of it was published in August, and that's bringing stuff into place as of the 1st of October, royal assent plus 18 months. So the first thing that happened, we had our new building safety regulator, which worst kept secret is based on HSE, and that HSE was given the task, and HSE officially became the National Building Safety Regulator as of the 1st of April. And what HSE said they were going to do was bring out a more stringent regulatory regime for high-risk residential buildings, where all buildings are required to be registered. There's requirements on, there's a lot more stringent legal requirements on duty holders of people. And then in terms of new construction of buildings, we will see the new gateways, which we're going to talk about, and new requirements on information recording, golden thread. And then beyond that, for existing buildings have to be registered, and HSE is running a registration process. And if you're responsible for an existing relevant building, i.e. over 18 meters, over 6 stories, that now needs to be registered by HSE, and you need to do that by the 1st of October. But that's all the stuff that's there to do with the high risk relevant buildings. However, they're also involved in certain ways with all buildings. HSE has taken over running the Building Advisory Committee. That's the committee that's responsible for drafting the building regs advisory documents. And HSE is responsible through work with the Industry Competence Committee on promoting competence of those working on all buildings. And HSE's come up with this catchy title here, from catchy tagline, from shed to shard, that covers to show that they are not just interested in the stuff on high risk buildings, but they are actually interested in all buildings going forwards. Okay. The recent stuff that that government came out with in support of HSE was about the late teens of August. A lot of the secondary legislation that underpins the building control framework for new high-rise residential buildings, high-risk residential buildings, has come out. The management of safety regs, the high-risk building procedures regs, various amendments to various bits and pieces of building regs, and they've all been published with a view to them going live as of the 1st of October. And that going live as of the 1st of October means that, as you can see there with that October 2023 pink circle, that high-risk buildings now will need to be registered by then, and it become offence not to be. and the building safety regulator comes building control for new high risk buildings. Okay, they're also going to be putting new things in place for buildings inspectors and new provisions for buildings inspectors, and so there's a whole, and that's as we transition fully over to this new system. So let's remind ourselves, and I hope none of this comes as a shock to you, what the Hackett gateways look like. So there's 3 key gateways that we have now. Gateway 1 is a planning stage, and in effect it's permission to design. And Gateway 1 requires a more detailed consideration of the fire strategy. Gateway 1 initially, when Gateway 1's been live for 12 months now, and initially about 75% of submissions to Gateway 1 at that stage were being rejected, although that figure's improved dramatically. Why were they being rejected? Things that insufficient consideration of fire and rescue service access, and consideration of numbers of staircases and means of escape. But that figure's starting to improve. That figure's been improving throughout the year as people have got used to what the gateway requires. So that's good. If we move on, what will now happen as of October is that gateways 2 and 3 go live. Gateway 2 will require, and again, remember this is for this is the new regulatory framework for high risk residential buildings. Gateway 2 requires that there are full plans laid down. So Gateway 2 requires a detailed design. With the conversation we had was REBA stage, in effect REBA stage 4. Okay, so there's a detailed design needs to be done before you get permission to construct. Gateway 3 is a check that what you designed at Gateway 2 is what you built at completion, which is permission to occupy. Okay, now fundamental thing here, the fundamental legal requirement to build a safe building hasn't changed. How you build a safe building hasn't, what that safe building looks like hasn't changed. What's changed here is the route that you need to go down to and the method that you go through the process to get to that safer building. Okay. So there's no fundamental change to legal requirements, but what we're going to have to do now is do more detailed designs and lodge them with HSE to get through Gateway 2, and then have HSE involved in that in the conversation as we go through construction to get to Gateway 3. And the secondary legislation to make this happen was finally published on August 18th. I wouldn't necessarily suggest you go off and read the secondary legislation. It's quite detailed, it's quite dry. But HSE have published, and I often talk about this and recommend to people, HSE has a building safety web portal. They put a monthly e-bulletin out to explain what's going on and where we're up to with the process, and links to all their guidance. And at the same time as government produced the secondary legislation, HSE produced this document here, an overview to gateways 2 and 3. Okay. It's about a 20-page document, and it's a more interesting and maybe a better read than trying to go through the regulations themselves. So Gateway 2 requires the client and designer to submit full plans for high-risk buildings, and once HSE is checked and there's timeframes involved for that, you get permission to construct. The construction phase needs to have an ongoing dialogue between HSE, client, and principal contractor. And there's a fundamental note here: major changes to your design, you have to stop and get them approved by HSE before you carry on with that construction. And here's a couple of examples in case of what in the document here as to what might provide a major change in design. It's changing compartment size or changing your constructional model. There are also minor changes that are deemed notifiable. And for a minor notifiable change, HSE have to be informed, but you can still proceed anyway. And the worry there was that one of the things that was suggested for that was the change in size of a builder's work hole. So in other words, in other words, changing that's quite a small change that you're going to need to inform HSE before you continue, before as you carry on. So there's going to be an awful lot of paperwork flying backwards and forwards. And then the final check, Gateway 3, demonstrate you built what was planned. So you know, this is one of the reasons why you need the detailed plans, is so that when you get to the end, you can demonstrate, you're going to be able to demonstrate that you did what you said you were going to do. Obviously, and if the least you can change, the more you do forwards and plan, therefore the least you need to change, therefore the easier you're going to get through Gateway 3. Sounds very simple, that. I'm sure it's not. And that takes me to poll question 2. Are you ready for Gateways 2 and 3? Ooh. See how that one fares. So looking at that, it's a nice, fairly even, an even split between not applicable, that we don't work on relevant buildings, and yes, they're putting place in steps to deliver the necessaries. Although 11% think we could have done with more notice, and I must admit, we could have done with this. It'll be interesting to see how this all evolves. Interestingly, the Irish building system, the building regulatory system, already has a lot of this in place, and was actually put in place in 2014. But it took them a number of years to wash through how this would actually work and what would happen to this, how this would unfold going forwards. Okay, right. Thank you for that. One of the key things that we saw on that previous slide that underpins as we go through all the gateways is the golden thread. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Stuart, and Stuart's going to take us through hopefully some sections on gateway, on the golden thread, as how that impacts us going forwards. Stuart, away you go.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, hopefully highlight some of the concerns that people have raised questions over the last few weeks since me joining the ASFP. So we're going straight into building records existing requirement, which is Regulation 38. Few people might not actually be aware of that regulation already being in place. It was 2010 that it's available from. And its requirement of information stored regarding the project. The problem with it is, like I say, not a lot of people were aware of the Regulation 38, and it had no teeth. It couldn't be reinforced. So you had a lot of projects that didn't go through the process of recording that information. In the Building Safer Future review, Dame Judith Hackett wrote that the review heard almost unanimous concern surrounding the ineffective operation of the current rules around the creation, maintenance, and handover of a building and fire safety information. The information isn't there on a lot of projects. If you work in the industry, you'll have seen that. I used to see it on a regular basis. What protects this steelwork? What's been used on protect this steelwork? What fire rating needs to be on that? Is on that steelwork, etc. Other examples are available, but so they proposed the golden thread, a much more rigorous regulation, have some teeth in it to enforce anyone that doesn't comply to that regulation as well. So the golden thread over the net with the integration of the gateways coming through, it's going to be very key that information is stored correctly. The requirements aren't actually available yet. It goes for October 1st, where we'll start to see how it actually looks into the marketplace, but there's obviously information available. Higher risk building, keeping and provision of information, etc., regarding regulations. So we are looking at keeping the digital information of what is in that building from the design side, planning, right the way through to the installation and certification of that one project. If you can imagine that being kept in files and paperwork, the file would be pretty deep and wouldn't be kept up to date. So that's why they're pushing towards the information being kept digitally, being kept securely, so it cannot be altered for other people's needs. So once that information is there, it's controlled and the relevant security systems in place to ensure that it can't be tampered with in any way. It should be the building's single source of truth. So what is in that building is in that documentation. It's all recorded, available to people who need the information to do a job. I'm going to give an example for the next 3 points. If you look at the rack situation with the schools, you've got a structural engineer, building surveyor coming to a school to inspect what is there any rack in that building. That person needs to have that information to be able to do a job, to be able to inspect that building. It also needs to be available when that person needs it. So, like I say, you take the example of school, they're turning up to school, they need that information there and then, or they need it prior to them. It can't be, oh, I need that information for that school, and then, oh, it'll be available in 8 months' time. That's not feasible. It needs to be clear, they're available straight away or when they need it. And presented in a way that the person can use it. There's no point in having files, hundreds of millions of files, and then having to search for each one. It needs to be there to be able to look very quickly and easily and find exactly what they're looking for, so that they can use that information to create a safe, implement any actions they need to make it a safe building again. And there's a quote from the latest gateways from the HSE pushed out, which is what we're sort of trialing with our digital task group that you'll touch on in a minute, and that's the assurance that evidence captured for any aspect of the build is of sufficient quality to allow a decision on compliance for that aspect. And we'll go into a bit more detail into what that means in the next slides. So, golden thread. Is it a golden thread? Is it a rope? There's a lot of information that's going to be stored on here, and it needs to be, and there's going to be pieces of information added to it continually throughout the process. So it needs to be strong. It needs to be robust in terms of what is kept on there. The new construction of relevant buildings. This is where it's starting. It is as the poll put out there, it's not relevant. We don't build relevant buildings. Pretty much in the first instance, it will be for new construction of relevant buildings and how that information is secured throughout the whole process. The onus is on the client to collate and submit the information. They're the ones that need to drive through the chain to everybody else in there that they need this information. I need to collate this. I need to submit it. They need to check the competence of individuals and companies throughout that whole process. Again, ASFP has put out information regarding competence of people, whether they're in an architect's practice, in a tier 1 contractor, or in the installation of passive fire protection. At each point, there needs to be competency recorded and collated into that chain, as well as products and systems that are used. Like I say, the responsibility relies with the client. The client must submit to HSE as partway of Gateway 2 review and Gateway 3. So they need to continually be updating the HSE with, we've done this. This is the information that we've got available. and then HSE can highlight if there's any potential risks or issues with that in that process. And inadequate info: no permission to construct or occupy will be given by HSE if there is not enough adequate information, or if there's any issues with that information that's been provided. So that's very big for the clients, that they, to be building a building, they're pushing out to have occupy and get people in that building, and then it's stopped because they haven't got the relevant information. So it's really key to them that they get it right in the very start. Next slide, Andy. Okay, next two slides. So, like we're saying, on the poll there, not applicable, don't work on relevant buildings. It will start to come through on not just new relevant buildings. Existing relevant buildings need to know what is in the building. As I say, cladding. What cladding's on that building? What steel protection is there? Is a rack on that building? That information does need to be stored and updated so that you don't have any problems going through the future. Not knowing a risk. So not knowing is the risk. Not knowing if there is a potential problem. If you don't know what cladding you've got on your project, on that building, then that's a risk. You need to have that information. You need to go find out and store that in the safety case. The safety case needed for continuing occupation. Safety case is there to provide that information for the fire service, for anyone that needs to do something for a critical sort of safety need. Can you identify the building safety risks in your building and show me how you manage these on an ongoing basis as far as you can, and so that it is safe? Okay, can you ask yourselves that question? Okay, so like we say, those first 3 points are the same. So the challenge: even buildings built in 2000s have lots of missing Regulation 38 information. We've seen it with the schools, with claddings, etc. There are other issues out in the marketplace. Let's find that information out. Let's record it in a way that is accessible very quickly. How often do we ask the question of historical buildings without knowing what passive fire protection is installed? The chap on the right there is checking that structural steel column. It doesn't know what fire performance that column is, doesn't know what paint's been used. There's thousands of projects out there where I've been involved in, and we don't know what fire performance is there, what products have been used, are they compliant, are they not? We don't know. So you have to go back to basics and replace it, and the cost in that is significant. So if you've got that information, if you've got that available, you can make quicker and easier decisions to make buildings safer again. Where information is not available, you will have to show that you have what you have done to find it. If you have problems with your safety measures, review and amend your maintenance regimes. It is important you keep this in mind as your building ages and equipment and technical progress develops. People going in, putting cables in through fire stopping systems that have been established. That kind of example. It's a continual. The golden thread doesn't just stop when the building is built. It's a continual strand that will go out for the life of the building. Okay, next slide, Andy. Okay, implication of Gateway. Gateway 3 and Golden Thread will drive an increased levels of recording and installed systems on installation practice. Like we say, it's Gateway 2 is the planning, the design stage. Gateway 3 is the actual construction. That is where the challenge lies in how what information we're gathering, what we're recording, how we're recording it. How is that linking back to the system where it was designed, so that we can keep that information in a process where we can actually look at it and at any point. David Hackett worried that the diverse digital systems will make this difficult to achieve. From discussions what we've had from the ASFP members, and what we're looking at with our digital group is, this is a concern. How do we get BIM to talk to other softwares? How do we get other design software to link up and record that information? Because there's got lots of little packages, all that are doing a very good job of having that information. But how do we link those all together? And that will be difficult and challenging for the industry to solve. But confident we can get there. Highlights the need for inspection to be well defined in contracts and code of practice. The people inspecting the buildings, are they competent? How are they recording, through that process? Digital recording, as I've said, how is it done? When? Product certification, what products going in there? When were they installed? Have they got a lifespan? That information is very critical. And who's recording that information? You can't just get someone, oh, here's a load of information, just put that on there for me, please. It needs to be done by somebody that knows that information, that this is the relevant information, this needs to be stored here in this way, so that other people can come along and view that to make their jobs. And there has to be proof that information is correct. Okay, next slide, Andy. That's what we're doing. That's what we're going to do at the ASFP. So there's lots of all these. You'll have questions now, no doubt. I can see the Q&A kicking off here with various different questions. We've got a group on the 4th of October of ASFP members where they develop software, they've passive fire protection contractors, tier 1 contractors, various other technical advisors, and we're getting them around the table, as well as some available on Teams, and we're going to get them around and we're going to go, right, what software is there? What do you use? How does it link with this? How does it link with that? Okay, so whether it's and we're going to develop a code of practice, effectively, that will give a specification, design software, how that links, installation, to how that link to the installation, inspection, recording. And then what we're going to do is give you clear guidance. So we say, right, this is how we think that it's used. We won't name different manufacturers of software. We'll just give you, this is what you need to do. This is how it looks to us. Give a mock example of what a perfect project looks like on the golden thread, from planning the idea of a project right through to the very completion of that project, and then what that looks like as the years progress. So we're going to try and create that sort of example, so that you can follow it and go through. And like I say, it comes down to the HSE quote, which is the assurance that evidence captured of any aspect of the build is sufficient quality to allow a decision on compliance for that aspect. Okay, it's gathering that information, making sure that the decisions can be educated and made with all the information available to make them buildings safer. Okay, the invite is open to join us for ASFP members on the 4th of October. We've got a list. It was only certain members available for the actual face-to-face meeting, but if you want to join in Teams or be involved at some point, feel free to drop me, Andy, or Sadia an email, and we'll get you involved. Hopefully that's okay there, Andy, for my first webinar, and we'll lead on to poll question 3. Are you ready for the golden thread requirements? Great question. Yes, okay. None of our activities impact the golden thread. Okay. Big mix.
It is a big mix, and you know what?
It's a big mix.
When you look at what we had with a cross section across everybody, from designers, specifiers, installers, distributors, and whatever, and maybe a distributor's activity wouldn't necessarily impact the golden thread.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody else's activities could and should impact the golden thread, maybe. So I'm just looking at that and thinking that's
if you're an architect, regardless of what building you're designing now, you're going to have to record some information and pass that information on to the person building it, and then that's passed on to contractor installing it. So there is that chain. So it's but yeah, so good information.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Thank you very much, Stuart. That was excellent. Well done. So, a reminder to everybody, we start off our new TG looking at digital code of practice on the 4th of October at UK Construction Week. We've got a meeting room booked in an annex to the NEC because we'll be there, and we'll be there for that, and we can do that. The awfully kind people of ASLEF have coordinated to help us doing that by organising a rail strike for that day, which they only announced on Friday last week, thanks to them. And so there will be a digital option for people, and that meeting is open to employees of ASFP member organisations. And if your organisation is not represented, you know the owner organisation is not represented, but want to be, then please let us know and we'll get you involved. Right, splendid. So I'm going to carry on now. I'm going to canter on through, and I'm into this. We've got construction products regs and construction products testing stuff to do, and we've got competence stuff to do, and we've got about 40 minutes, so 20 minutes. So I need to canter on with this fairly quickly. So construction products regulations is in section 9 of the Building Safety Act. We did have a rough draft secondary legislation that was published in 2021. That's been removed, and we're awaiting the next iteration, and we think that's going to come forwards. Basically, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to base on what was in that 2021 legislation, because that's all I can base it on. We think it won't change. We don't expect much to change from that anyway. Various reasons for that. So construction products regulator, we know we're having a new construction products regulator. There is a challenge that enforcing things in the construction products regulation space is difficult. It's really complicated. It's not as easy for trading standards as fake cigarettes, fake trainers, etc., etc. And so as a result, and it's not just in the UK this happens, the issue of enforcing construction products products problems happens. It occurs across all of Europe. There's very few CPR prosecutions, if any, because it's too complicated. But OPSS has come in as a new regulator now. That should, in an attempt to try and get around that. They have powers to demand rectification of problems, stop products being used to prevent further harm, rectify things going back. But one of the key things with OPSS, they're only looking at product supply. So for manufacturers, OPSS looks to your factory gate, and that's it. They don't go any further. They can also look at misleading marketing claims. They'd started off as a shadow regulator already. They're looking into 6 key product areas. We've come across them because they've been looking at smoke control systems post-Grenfell. They've been looking at smoke control dampers, smoke control ducts, and we've been talking to them about that. They've also been doing fire doors. They've also been doing, obviously, external cladding and insulation systems. One of the things government committed to doing post the Hackett report was reviewing construction products testing, and they did a review in summer 2021. Was conducted, led by Paul Morell and Annalise Day, and they finally produced their report, Testing for a Safer Future, in April 2023. It's a 100 and odd page read if you're interested in it. It's a very good and thorough and comprehensive report, but it was obviously drafted, and the bulk of the text was drafted in and around summer autumn 21, and it hasn't been changed much and updated much since. So it identifies a lot of things that we knew and a lot of things that we were talking back in 2021, which is when we had the last draft legislation, the draft secondary legislation out, and so it reflects that per se. It does make a lot of recommendations for government, about 20 headline recommendations broken down into about 80 parts. And so the vast majority of the recommendations falls onto government, but we do get some for UCAS and industry, and we'll pull out the industry stuff especially. When you look at what Paul said, one of the things he was tasked with was looking at how the UK system for testing safety of products works. Why was he asked that? To restore the outcome of the product safety assessment, so that the public would trust that a product is safe and will perform as labelled and marketed. But the problem is that, of course, the system we have isn't necessarily a system for testing the safety of construction products. A lot of the system that we have and the tests that we have is, and the European system that we've sort of descended from recently, is aimed at making a common understanding and common expressions of product performance that can be used across Europe. So a manufacturer from France can test a product in Spain and sell it in Germany, and that they're all speaking the same language and they all understand one another's terminology. The European system that we're based on is more about freedom of movement of goods than it is about safety. And one of the issues of the CPR is that, in actual fact, it places, as it stands at the way the European system works at the moment, it places the requirement to determine the safety of a product on the project, and not necessarily on the manufacturer or the approval body. It's why we have European technical assessments now instead of European technical approvals. It's an assessment, and somebody else decides on how you would approve it, whether you would approve it. So the European, one of the issues that Morel and Day highlighted is the over-reliance of the European CPR for safety of products, where it isn't necessarily that's its primary function. We've mentioned failure of market surveillance and no enforcement. It's too complicated, but we've now put OPSS in place. Let's see how that works. Key one here: too many AVCP systems. AVCP, it's too complicated, says the little picture. There's too many acronyms involved in this. AVCP is the attestation and verification of constancy of performance. And what a lot of people don't realize is that not all CE marks are created equally. There are different levels of testing and assessment and assurity that you need to go through to place a CE mark or whatever on a product. Many passive fire protections are not covered by designated standards, so there's no mandatory product standard to work with them. And of course, the bad manufacturer behavior is hard to control. And one of the things that Morel and Day highlighted is government do like a concept of three big things. You know, we've seen the 3 bullet point things on the lectern at Downing Street. They like that. Well, this isn't necessarily going to be easily resolved with 3 big things. Right. I've mentioned AVCP. I'm going to let me just explain a little bit more about what AVCP means. Right, there are different product families have different levels of AVCP. Okay, and it's which starts all the way at the bottom, where we call system 4 or level 4, where basically the manufacturer samples the product, tests the product, decides that the product's good enough, and sticks the necessary marks on it, and keeps a file that says, I've done all this work and I think it's all right. Stick the CE mark on it, stick the UKCA mark on it, and away you go. Okay. Now, there aren't any passive fire protection products involved in at level 4, although we do have some things that have product performance requirements at system 4. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. The bulk of what we do sits at the moment at what's called system 1. So the manufacturer is responsible for his own factory production control. The manufacturer is responsible for making sure that the product is made properly and the records are correct. But when you come to testing and assessing the thing, the laboratory comes, the notified body comes in, witnesses the manufacturer or takes stuff off the shelf and samples it, tests it and assesses it. The manufacturer conducts a production audit at the start of the process, and the notified body conducts an production audit at the start of the process, and does regular follow-up audits to make sure that nothing much changes. Okay, and that's where the vast majority, System 1 is where the vast majority of our stuff sits. Some PFP does sit within what's called System 3. System 3, the manufacturer makes it, the manufacturer is responsible for maintaining that, but the only thing that the conformity assessment body does is it tests it. It doesn't necessarily sample it. It doesn't necessarily do any follow-up audits, initial audits. It just does the testing, and we do have some bits and pieces at SIS3. Okay, the interesting one here is that SIS1 Plus. And SIS1 Plus not only has all of the stuff that we do at the moment, but also requires that we sample and test stuff on a regular basis. So you would have to actually send samples on a regular basis to your conformity assessment body to have them retested to prove that the performance hadn't changed any. So the recommendations that we should be looking at, according to Paul, is that's too complicated. Simplify it. And you know what? Can we increase the rigor? Can we get rid of 4? Can we get rid of 3? Can we get everything to 1 or even 1+? Can we educate people about what the different AVCP systems are? I hope you consider yourself educated. You know, so we're looking now at that. We're looking at devising a certificate so that we produce a standard template and a standard format and a standard set of documents for manufacturers. There's going to be more information. Manufacturers are going to need to put more information into labs when booking a test to prove that we aren't shopping around for the best possible result. Paul suggested we adopt and promote CCPI. We're going to talk about that towards the end. And there's all sorts of other stuff about labeling and traceability. So we're going to have to we, the industry, are going to have to do a lot of this because government doesn't want, it's for us to do. There's other stuff that government can do. It's generally quite complicated. Some of it government's already done, like the new regulator at OPSS. The interesting one there, results are too complicated to understand. Government should simplify by using classification. That's going to be an interesting one and subject for another presentation. We're talking to government about that. We've kind of worried that using classification can be too simple, and it's a European nut that's quite hard to crack and doesn't necessarily reflect end use conditions. Requirement for manufacturers to share information with regulator, that's coming, and manufacturers providing a DOP, again, that will be part of the whole revision of construction products stuff going forwards. Okay, so there's lots of requirements for government, and lots of it's very, very complicated. There were lots of very, very complicated stuff, but again, it comes back, government to simplify, strengthen AVCP system. The recommendation to use System 1 Plus for safety critical products, which is actually a higher level of conformity assessment than current third-party certification, and it's quite a lot higher than some of the systems that are some of the product families that only go through AVCP 3. And manufacturers are going to have to make all the documentation available. So there's a lot of recommendations there from government, but the main aim we think is going to be that a strengthening and a driving to higher levels and better systems of attestation and verification of constancy of performance. For those of you that were there, we did a seminar last week and in London, and Niall presented a critique of the Morell and Day report. And during the conversations, Chandru was there from DLUC, said the effect of, go on then, well, what would you give? You know, here's the challenge. Give us what should we do? And Niall's suggestion, we couldn't do it in 3, had to do it in 4. Let's not have one. At the moment, we're potentially looking at 3 regulatory frameworks for construction products: safety critical, general duty of safety, and CE UKCA, which we'll come on and explain in a couple of slides. We should adopt one AVCP level for PFP products, ideally System 1, or even better still, System 1+. We should use the third-party certificate methodology, but harmonise it and modify it and harmonise it, upgrade it to 1+, and again regularise and harmonise the legislation so that we have one bit of legislation for construction products. And we're waiting, and DLUC have said they will come back. They have undertaken they will come back to us and run their proposals past us at some point in the next month. That takes me on to question 4. And so question 4 is, what do you think we should do with PFP products? Increase all to System 1+, leave all up to System 1, which is the one without the regular annual every other year audit testing by the third-party laboratory, or leave systems as they are at the moment, where some products may well be, and the one is some of the insulation products and some of the gypsum boarding and flexible wall systems are System 3. I'm going to have to get a move on because I'm going to be overrunning here at this. I've still got another 10 slides to go, and we've got about 20 odd open questions. Okay, here we go. Excellent. Thank you very much. So increase all to System 1+ 45, all up to System 1 38, 17% leaves as they are. That's really useful, helps us with when we're discussing these things, share that with DLUC and sort of point out where we're up to and what our audience thought. Excellent. Super. Okay. Right. I'm going to crash on. So hopefully this is nothing new to you. We are, as we say, we're waiting DLUC to come out with the new construction products regs stuff going forwards. And many of you will have seen this particular slide because this is what they proposed in 2021, and we haven't seen anything that makes us think this is going to change. So on the left hand, they're going to introduce a general safety requirement regarding construction products. Okay, so manufacturers need to make sure that the product is safe to put on the market. Basically, that's done by manufacturers doing a risk assessment before they launch stuff. And there's a BSI PAS 7050 that covers manufacturers' requirements in that particular area. We've got the existing regulatory approach for stuff subject to a harmonised European standard, which in our world is dampers. We have now a designated British standard for dampers, and that exists there. And the vast majority of what we do will fall into the middle. And that's where the Secretary of State will create a statutory list of safety critical products. There will be a new product standard that will be mandatory, that will put requirements onto our products. Okay, so everything will be under the left block, and then everything will also be under either the centre or the right. Dampers under the right, pretty much everything else, lots of other stuff under the centre. At the same time as doing all that, many of you will be aware that the government in December last year, closed in March, posted a consultation asking about the removal of BS 476 from approved document B. We're still waiting for, lots of people commented on this, and we're still waiting for this to be resolved. Look, it's been heavily commented upon. One of the challenges, some industries are still entrenched in BS 476. Notably, the fire door industry still uses a lot of BS 476. Government had said that they were going to look to replace BS 476 with European classification. And again, the classification system doesn't reflect necessarily end uses, although it is easier to understand. And so we're waiting to see when we will see a formal response. One's been promised to us at some point, and it wouldn't surprise me if the new construction product regulation framework under Building Safety Act and the response to this removal of BS 476 and the response to the next slide, implications of Brexit and CE to UKCA, doesn't all get rolled into one big response, so that government can deal with these three issues in one. It would make logical sense, and that certainly was the message that we were getting last week. There's no point doing one of these and then having to revisit again for the other, and having to revisit again for the third. I don't know if you're all aware, CE market, UK government policy was to end CE and switch to UKCA. The end date was the end of 2024 for all stuff, and the 30th of June 2025 for construction products. We had an announcement early August, about the 1st of August, from government that CE marking will, in effect, be able to be used in perpetuity, with a reminder that CE marking is a freedom of movement mark and not necessarily a safety mark. However, that's what the government failed to mention when they were in the August. It doesn't necessarily apply for construction products. So where we are today is that the government policy is still that UK CE making and the switch to UKCA for construction products will end on the 30th of June 2025. One of the challenges here is that there are different end dates for different regulations, and therefore things that are and products that are caught up in more than one directive can get very confused. And the reason I mention that is, for instance, active fire curtains that our TG7 members get involved in. They will have to change over from CE where CE marking is appropriate. They will have to change from CE to UKCA as of the 30th of June for fire resistance under the construction products regs. But equally, they also have to be marked for the machinery directive, because these things class as machines, and therefore they will be under that. You could still CE mark to machinery directive, let alone or UKCA, your call. We wait and see what happens, and we think this is going to get tied in with the whole thing going forwards. And that then scooches me into my last little bit, competence. And what we've been doing, we've been taking a whole series of documents like that you can see on the screen there, and rolling them together into one massive competence framework going forwards. And our competence framework really has two parts. In effect, one of the first areas that we're looking at is organizational competence. Okay, and how we're going to set and improve standards for organizational competence, notably for installers, but there will be elements that we'll do for eventually for manufacturer designers, etc., is where there is a third-party certification scheme. And again, I say installers because all our ASFP installer members are third-party certified for those activities. We're going to set minimum standards for what those certification schemes involve and undertake. We're going to be increasing the requirements there. Okay, so we as ASFP are talking to the cert bodies to strengthen the certification criteria that's already in place. What will then happen is the certification bodies, using that strengthened schedule, will be placing questions on the organization they are certifying, and asking questions to make sure that the organization are using competent individuals. Okay, and because the organization has written, the certifying bodies have written stuff into their certification schedule that explain that based on our tighter requirements, UCAS should be auditing the certification body against that to make sure that the certification body is doing what they're supposed to do. And to support that, we're going to use a quality mark. And this image is out of date, but we're still working on what the image will look at. And the mark can be used by certification bodies who run certification schemes, which encompass the detailed requirements. The mark will be given by the certification bodies to their to the installing organisation, so the installing organisations can use that in support of the framework. I say we're working with our certification task group to produce the information as to and the requirements for what those will be for the certification schemes. The other area where we're working is in terms of our competency pathway is the individual, and we're looking at a framework where we set a series of requirements for the individual, which is based around to a scheme that's written around BS 8670 and the industry response group working group 12 white paper, and all sorts of other things. CCPI gets a mention in some of the manufacturer texts, and so there's a competence framework there which is set for the individual. So if you as an individual want to be seen to be able to be doing something, there's a framework that says what evidence you need to have to show that. And the way that this system works is we mandate what the individual has. The individual records their competence against that. The organisation should be checking that the installing organisation, the employing organisation, checks that the individual has the relevant things and steps that in place. The certification body involved checks that the organisation is checking that the individual has the relevant things, etc., etc. And so that's how that side of things works on the screen in front. And to that end, we're generating a web-based inquiry form that says the evidences and records completion. Okay, and that's nearly ready to go live at some point in the near future once we've got more of the activities written down, so that you will be able to go on there, see what training, what skills, knowledge, experience and behaviors you need to be able to demonstrate, and evidence that yes or no you've got that. One of the recommendations from both the final slide before I'm nearly done, recommendation from Hackett and Morel was a thing called CCPI, and as a reminder to manufacturers, the first tranche of companies has now registered and joined the Code for Construction Products Information, which is a way of verifying that you are using any of your marketing and or technical literature is correct and appropriate for your products. And the first half dozen companies are out there, and there's a couple of 3 ASFP members within that first half dozen. I can imagine this has got lots of traction as a way of doing it, and at some point in the future it will become compulsory, no doubt. It's brought to you by the same people that brought to you the Considerate Constructors scheme, so please sign up, get involved in that. Okay. Right, so there we go. That's the end of the presentation. Obviously, we're going to have to collaborate. No one has all the answers. My suggestion is that there's going to need to be a better and more considered design, and maybe simpler designs and more thorough designs. We know that manufacturers are going to have to test and certify the relevant things, because there's a bit of a disconnect between what is designed, and what is required for a building, and what is testing, and how the test standards worked. And what we need to do, one of the things that we can do as ASFP, we're sat in the middle, we can try and bring the two back together. Please design it better, and once you've designed it better, construct what was designed, don't change it. So that, and because that will make, if you do, then you're going to be in a situation where lots of conversations backwards and forwards with HSE. Record and keep the records, and once you've done it, you obviously need to maintain your PFP in place to prove that your building remains safe to occupy and habit. Right, that takes me to questions and answers. So what I propose to do, I apologise, we've overrun a little bit. It's about 10. It's 1:05. So we'll do about 10 minutes of Q&A if that's all right, and then we'll crash on. we will be uploading a video of this. There's a question: can we provide a literacy gateway document? And I'm not. I don't know how easily that will be to do with the. If we upload that, we'll try and see if we can get a link to that document on the email, telling you that about the seminar, about this and about this. Okay. The digital fire information should be more aligned with COBE in the way that procedures and systems is in place, not a duplication and a conflict between the two systems. I'd agree with that. One of the things that we need to do is with the fire information that we have is that it needs to be a simple system that therefore ties in, and that it's one system that you can look at, you can go around and assess with your building. One of the questions that came up in London last week when we were talking about this is who's going to pay to make sure that these systems all integrate and all work together. We'll be dealing with that in our code of practice session, won't we, Stuart? Good. So that's that. Okay. There's an interesting question from an anonymous attendee. Can Gateway 2 be broken down into different phases? It's unlikely that REBA Stage 4 design will be complete before the substructure and main frameworks would typically start. There is, within the Gateway system, it's allowed to break down the to have sub part and do it part by part and section by section, so that you can break it down in it. But I don't think you can break it down into the forms of substructure, then mainframe, then whatever. That's one of the reasons why we get into problems at the moment, is that by trying to break it down and do it like that, at some point towards the end of it, you get to the point where you're asking somebody to do something and to install something that can't be done. It can't be designed, it can't be installed, because it's not, because the whole thing hasn't been considered. And so I would suggest that whilst you can do it part by part, sub project by sub project, I think you will need, this is one of the things that will need to change, and that you will need to work to CD through to REBA 4 before you can start doing the substructure and mainframe. And that's certainly something I've been talking to a number of people within tier 1 world, tier 1 contractor world, about the fact that that's going to have to happen. Okay. There was a question about a project having 3 principal designers, a structural, an MEP, and an architect principal designer, and this is one of the challenges, that we have a difference between the principal designer is a terminology both in Building Safety Act and also in CDM regs. And while CDM and to the point of the fact where a CDM reg principal designer may or may not be the Building Safety Act principal designer, and the legal requirement that the Building Safety Act for a principal designer and the tasks that the principal designer has under Building Safety Acts can be undertaken by one person, or has to be undertaken by one person, but it doesn't necessarily have to be one of the CDM principal designers. And so somebody has to take that legal requirement. Okay. With a question about Regulation 38, will it be enforceable retrospectively? That's a really good question. I'll be honest, I don't know. It doesn't seem to be, but equally, under safety case regulations for high risk building going forward, in fact, you're going to have to recreate that Reg 38 input where it's missing. It gets lost. It gets lost, and it sort of disappears and whatever. So so if it's disappeared, I think it will need to be recreated. But it's actually Reg 38 will not apply to high risk relevant buildings going forwards. It will be the golden thread regulations that apply to high risk relevant buildings going forwards. And therefore, if Reg 38's not if the golden thread stuff isn't applicable, then that does have some teeth, and you will have to go back. Some comments about the fact that BS 8644 allows digital and paper copies, and that digital information's moved through different media going forwards. I'd say that it's now in the cloud, and golden thread requirements are that it has to be digital and it will need to be in the cloud. Okay, that's what the regulations will say. Who's enforcing it? Will it be local authority assessment and issuing enforcement notice? I'm assuming if that's referring to golden thread, no, golden thread will be HSE. Golden thread will work through there is a term now. Come on, what was the term that they were using last week? Multidisciplinary teams, MDT, which is a combination of local authority building control, HSE, and fire and rescue services, who will be responsible for doing this going forwards. And who's responsible for collating any missing information, owner or occupier? The requirements invariably legally fall back to the owner, not necessarily the occupier. Whether the owner or the occupier, whether the owner elects to ask the occupier to do it or not, it is the owner that the legal requirement lands upon. Is there any made or documentation that gives guidance on what constitutes a major change and a notifiable change? It's in that HSE guide that we had up. Okay. Here's one, Stuart. Now I'm going to throw this one at you, Stuart. Do some distributors not have their own specialist teams who switch specs? Is that not you in a past life, sir?
How did I know you were going to ask me that one? I think every distributor has a specific a specialist team that will work with contractors throughout, when supplying materials. The big thing there is not actually changing the specifications. A distributor should not be changing a specification. It should be a manufacturer and the specialist contractors that are changing specifications should there be a need to. And that should be it should always be linked back to architect, designers throughout that whole process. So flipping specs, it's a difficult thing. We've coming through with the new regulations, Gateway 2, Gateway 3. I can see spec flipping becoming less and less, between different manufacturers, because you've got to submit the information early on and follow that through to completion. So it's going to be interesting how that works. But yeah, obviously distributors do have specialist teams, but they shouldn't be taking the responsibility in changing specifications. It should be working with manufacturers and other competent people in the industry to provide right information and the right systems that are suitable for that application. Does that answer it, Andy?
Yeah, I think it does.
Sure, I'll get a few more questions on that one.
I'm sure we will. There's a couple. There was another one on there, similar one on there. What we'll do is let's do one. We'll do two more, and then we'll wrap. Just I'm conscious it's 20. It's nearly 15:15. It'll be 20 past by the time we do it. Even at doing that, what we'll do is quite often what we do is we take the Q&A file, and if we've answered it, we will, and if we haven't answered it, we'll try and put some stuff on the website with them. One for you, Stuart. Will the ASFP competence framework be able to tie in with systems, the inspection systems like Boris Bolster, etc., or be a publicly searchable database in order to tie in with the installer competence?
Don't know. Is the answer to that one?
Oh, right. Well, I was going to say I was going to say that the answer is the individual competence thing will be an individual's. It will be owned and maintained by the individual. And under GDPR, we can't allow you an outside party to go onto the system and search on it without permission of the individual whose records it is. But in effect, what the installing organization will be able to do is to place a link onto the software that says that they've looked at something and that it's that the person concerned has they're aware that the person concerned has the appropriate competence, so that you can put that into the file, so that the file does cover the competence of the individual concerned in some way. Okay.
Yeah.
There was it says, and I'm just going to one more question. It did a I saw one there about 476. Where was it there? Fire consultants are still specifying compartmentation to use for BS 476. Is this still acceptable? At the moment, ADB refers first and foremost to the EN, but allows you to use BS 476 based tested products as an alternate. And so the table in there does that. At some point in the future, that may be removed. So bear that in mind. But yes, at the moment, ADB still allows that. There are other reasons why people might not be able to use, might be driven in the general direction of BSEN's tested standards, but that 476 is still referred to and allowed under ADB. Okay. And I think with that, I think we'll if there's any that's left there, we'll come back and deal with them and put them on the web link to this as we go forwards. So we'll wrap the thing up now. We've got a couple more slides. Just a reminder that we have got a 1 hour CPD. It says it does say that there, but I've been exchanging text messages during the thing with the office, and the ASFP office says that they will just I think they will just produce, if you've been on the call since the start, thank you very much for listening, and we will send you a CPD certificate per se, because I think we've had a bit of an issue with our CRM system on this apparently, so it will do that anyway. And just a reminder, we've got our regatta challenge being launched on the 19th of June, for the 19th of June next year, and there are spaces available. Those of us that were on it this year had an excellent day. It's a really good team building opportunity, and if you want to come and join us for that day, please do. And I've managed to hide it spectacularly. There are a very, very few spaces left for our Christmas awards dinner in November at the Leonardo Hotel in London. You can see the information on both of those events on the ASFP website. Go and have a look if you've not got your places, or you want to get involved in either the Regatta Challenge or our annual awards dinner in November in that London. And with that, thank you very much for attending. Thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. And we look forward to seeing you all at another one of these at some point in the future, or even shock or a gasp in person. And we'll see you all soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.